Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Wilson Center. I'm Shihoko Goto, the director of the Indo-Pacific program based here in Washington, D.C. It's been 2 days since the U.S. election results were announced. On January 20th, Donald Trump will be sworn in for the second time to become the 47th president of the United States. His victory was decisive, winning 295, or well over the majority of electoral college votes needed. Donald Trump also won the popular vote. The Republicans also now have a majority in the Senate. And as we speak, we are currently waiting for the final results of the House race to be called. In his victory speech, President-elect Trump declared that his new administration will herald a new golden age for America. U.S. voters are clearly concerned about the domestic economy. They are also concerned about border security, and many have come to support Donald Trump as a vote for change from the status quo. But of course, the U.S. election results have repercussions far beyond the U.S. borders. Today, we want to focus on what the return of Donald Trump will mean for the Indo-Pacific, and how some of the key allies and partners in the region are anticipating change in Washington, and whether or not they too will change in their relations with the United States moving forward. We will focus on perspectives from Japan, Korea, India, and the Philippines. And I'm excited to be able to be joined by a great lineup of speakers from the region. They are Satoru Mori, a professor of contemporary international politics and also deputy director of the Center for Strategy at Keio University in Tokyo. Ambassador Ho-Yoon Ahn, chair professor of North Korean studies at Kyongyam University and former ambassador of the Republic of Korea to the United States. Ambassador Nirupama Rao, former foreign secretary of India and former ambassador of India to the United States. And Don McLean-Gill, professor at De La Salle University in Manila. We will also be taking questions from you. There is a chat box on the screen below. Please feel free to submit any questions when you like, and we'll try to get to them to as many questions as we can throughout the course of this conversation. So let's begin. Let me first turn to you, Professor Mori. Japan, too, has just had a lower house election, and there's been a significant shift in Japanese domestic politics. There's also growing uncertainty about the leadership of its new Prime Minister, Shigeru Ishiba. But over the past decade, Japan's vision for the Indo-Pacific and its championing for a rules-based order have led Japan to emerge as a regional stabilizer. Hoping you could share your thoughts about what Japan's priorities will be in its relations under Trump with the United States, and what you anticipate U.S. expectations from Japan to be.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I want to thank Shihoko and the Wilson Center for inviting me to this event. It's a real privilege to be able to speak alongside distinguished speakers today. As Shihoko just mentioned, I've been tasked to discuss what Japan expects from the second Trump administration, so I would like to touch upon several topics, starting off with some policy level issues. Looking at Japan-US bilateral relations, I think people are talking about 3 issues, basically. One is a possible demand for a defense budget increase. Second, demand for a host nation support increase, which could perhaps happen in the fiscal year 2027 because the existing agreement lasts until 2027. And thirdly, imposition of 10% tariffs on Japanese goods. But I'm cautiously optimistic that the Japanese government will be able to manage these issues. And this is because I don't think the Japanese government is in a position or has the luxury of creating tension or rift with the Trump administration at this critical time, when it needs to advance so many cooperative initiatives with the United States. So those are some policy issues that Japan is concerned about. Moving on to second point, which I would like to touch upon, and that those are strategic level issues. As you may know, the United States has been playing a very significant role in sustaining the international order. And I think the three primary functions that the United States has been playing has been deterrence, trade liberalization, and promotional values. And I think these three roles or functions will undergo significant shift. In the area of deterrence, we normally talk about capacity and intention. And in terms of military capacity, I expect the Trump administration to increase the defense budget, U.S. defense budget, and also prioritize Asia when it comes to the so-called three-theater defense issue. But on the intention side, Trump administration would generally take a tough stance against China. But nevertheless, if a crisis erupts, people are wondering how is Mr. Trump going to react to that kind of crisis? If the commander-in-chief believes that there is no country or region worth spilling American blood, then credibility of U.S. deterrence will be shaken. So there are certain sort of questions, fundamental, profound questions about the intention of the president. On the other hand, there are opportunities related to this deterrence effort, and Japan is on course to fundamentally bolster its defense capability and strengthen defense cooperation with the United States. And this is likely to accelerate, I think, during the Trump administration. So those are some issues related to deterrence. Second, on trade, I think there is almost bipartisan agreement related to advancing managed trade rather than trade liberalization. This happened or started maybe during the first Trump administration. So I would expect tariffs for reindustrialization, to use Robert Lighthouse's term, reshoring supply chains, and tighter tech transfer regulations. Facing these kind of policies, I think Japan will have to, number one, continue advancing CPTPP without the United States. Number two, pursue U.S. market penetration by negotiating maybe tariff exemptions. Number three, hopefully get itself more involved in U.S. decision-making process related to tech regulations. This is going to be very, heavy lifting, but those are some of the issues and challenges and opportunities that Japan will face in the trade area. And thirdly, promotional values. I think Mr. Trump will need to convene the Summit for Democracy like President Biden, and he's unlikely to advocate democracy versus autocracy approach. So reaching G7 consensus could become maybe difficult once again. So that would be a sort of a challenge. But on the other hand, Trump administration would not impose liberal values on other states. And I just wonder whether this kind of a pragmatic sort of a non-value-based approach to foreign engagement would widen or possibly expand the opportunity for diplomatic engagement with the global South. We'll have to see. And lastly, I want to finish off by pointing just another challenge. And I think major policymakers will be loyal to Mr. Trump and yet still have different approaches about advancing policy objectives. There has been talk about the so-called primacists, prioritizers, and restrainers. And perhaps the prioritizers and the restrainers could form the Trump national security team. But as a result, I think we could see mixed signals coming out from the Trump administration and possibly also from the Congress as well. So we will have to sort of see and discern what are the true intention of the Trump administration is. That would be a sort of a major challenge in figuring out, what the actual direction of the Trump administration is going to be. Those are some of the major challenges that I think. And lastly, Ishiba government would not be able to depart from existing policy due to its weak political standing, I think. There has been talk about his commentary on the Hudson Institute website, but I think those policy initiatives are essentially non-starters. I think it would be difficult for him to sort of push and advance those rather controversial policy initiatives. So my expectation is that Japan-US relations would probably be managed pretty well until at least next summer when we have the upper house elections. I think the Japanese government will aim to sort of stabilize the relationship and do a sort of smooth takeoff in 2025. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Professor Morty. Of course, here in Washington, when we talk about Japan and US relations, we often talk about the leadership level connection that then President-elect Trump had with the late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. My question to you before I turn to Ambassador An is, do personalities matter in US-Japan relations? And if so, what will be Japan's strengths?
Yes, I think personality matters. Having seeing the Abe-Trump relationship, I think it proved critical in maintaining good relationship between Japan and the United States. But the thing is, we don't really know what the chemistry is between the two leaders until they have the first summit meeting. And I think one thing Mr. Ishiba can do before he meets Mr. Trump is practice golf before he goes into his meeting. But otherwise, I think it's the leaders' chemistry. And Mr. Ishiba has been known to be sort of a non-mainstream in the Liberal Democratic Party for a long time, and he fought the leadership for 5 times for the leadership election, and he finally got the position. So if he can present himself as a fighter to Mr. Trump, Mr. Trump probably likes that kind of political figure, political leaders who have undergone political struggle is some sort of characteristics or personality that he might like. So hopefully that would help him create a good image for Mr. Trump. So, but that's only a theory. I'm not quite sure what's actually going to happen between the two leaders. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. Ambassador On, we have Korea, which under President Yoon, it has been lauded as he has been lauded as a courageous leader by President Biden and the Biden administration at large for its commitment to enhancing the trilateral relations between the United States and Japan. But we have this big challenge where the Yoon presidency will remain until 2027, but President Yoon's public support continues to falter. The latest polls see his popularity at 17%. But at the same time, Korea is at the front line of a shifting geopolitical reality in the region. We've seen a seismic shift in the position of North Korea, a closer cooperation between the DPRK and Russia. We've also seen a shift in relations between Russia and China. So in all of that, what are the ROK's expectations for relations with the United States moving forward on the foreign policy front? And I'm also hoping you may be able to touch upon the outlook for Korea's relations with the United States economically moving forward.
Right. Let me start by thanking you, Shihoko. And the way I look upon it, I think the United States is meeting with many challenges, both within the United States itself as well as around the world. And one of them would be what is happening to something called rule-based international order. You already mentioned about rule-based international order. And then as a matter of fact, it is meeting with many challenges around the world. And then one good example of that challenge to the rule-based international order would be the war in Ukraine. And as you rightly pointed out now, there is growing collusion between Russia and North Korea. So that, in fact, is adding to the security concerns we already have on the Korean Peninsula. So for that, as well as other reasons, Korea is more than ready to work with the United States to defend and further promote rule-based international order. And Korea is not alone. There are a large number of allies who, in fact, are willing and then who, in fact, have the capacity, proven capacity to work with the United States to promote rule-based international order. And talking about Korea, well, Shihoko, you talked about all those, say, difficulties we have, but at the same time, when it comes to Korea's conventional military capability, we're the 5th or 6th most powerful military in the whole world. And then there is a lot we could be working together with the United States for the promotion of rule-based international order. While talking about economy, Shihoko, you talked about economic issues. I think another big challenge for the new administration, as well as the current administration in the United States, would be to fight inflation and promote economic growth. And again, I think Korea has a lot to offer because Korea has the proven manufacturing capability. At the same time, Korea has dynamic research capacity in semiconductors, in AI, in quantum computing, et cetera, et cetera. And yesterday, President Yoon of South Korea had telephone conversation with President-elect Trump. And then in that conversation, President Trump, he talked about advanced manufacturing capability of Korea. in particular, shipbuilding capability of Korea. And then it said, well, United States looks forward to working with Korea, for example, in, say, maintenance and repair of naval vessels. So again, when it comes to fighting inflation and promoting economic growth, there is a lot we could be doing together between Korea and United States. And then the last thing we want with respect to that would be raise of tariffs. Raising tariffs will not help to fight with inflation or to promote economic growth. And my third and last point would be this, which is creating jobs, creating quality jobs. Again, that's a challenge for the United States, and then all of the countries represented in this panel. And for creating jobs, what do you need? You need investment. And last year, in the US market, Korea was the largest investor in the whole world. And Korea was not only the largest investor, but at the same time, best paying investor. How do I know that? I can learn it from statistics of Department of Commerce. So that, in fact, is something we have been doing, working with the United States to create quality and best paying jobs in the US market. And I have to tell you that, as a matter of fact, those legislations like CHIPS Act or IRA, they in fact played a very important role in attracting foreign investment come to the US market. So that, I think, is the reason why the new incoming administration might wish to think twice about what is to be done with respect to CHIPS Act as well as IRA Act. So whether it is promotion of rule-based international order or fighting inflation or creating jobs, there is a lot we could be doing together with a new incoming administration coming January. So thank you.
No, thank you so much, Ambassador An. Just to clarify and to hopefully have you expand a bit on US, what essentially has become industrial policy. There was a lot of pushback from Korea in particular about the United States adopting this IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. But at the same time, it has incentivized countries, including Korea, to invest more in the United States. My understanding is that should the United States actually continue and deepen the IRA, that it could actually motivate countries to invest more in the United States. Is that something that could be a greater partnership that by major Korean conglomerates investing further in critical states like Kentucky, Tennessee, Ohio, that would actually enhance US-Korea relations?
That's true. And then, well, Shihoko, you're absolutely right when you said that initially, when the legislation was first brought about in August 2023, there was quite a surprise back in Seoul. But at the same time, I think, well, when it comes to the detailed guidelines, which Department of Treasury as well as Department of Commerce came up with, coming up with those guidelines, I have to say, US government was very responsive to what the foreign investors had to say. So they, in fact, tried to take into consideration those concerns being expressed by foreign investors. And that, in fact, is the reason why Korean business companies could invest so much in the US market, ending up by being the largest foreign investor last year in the US market. And as I already said, I very much hope that it will continue in the days to come. And for that reason, I think, well, we may need IRA, we may need CHIPS Act.
Great. Thank you for that. Ambassador Rao, we've seen President Trump have very strong personal connection with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. There had been mutual appreciation and respect on the part of the two men. The US-India relationship goes far beyond personalities, and we've seen the Biden administration be very committed to deepening relations with India on an economic as well as security front. And that has been made clear with the bilateral comprehensive and strategic partnership agreement that was agreed upon in September. How do we move forward from here? When Trump talks about a golden age for America, are we also going to see a golden age that is to come between the United States and India? And if that is the case, then what do you see as some of the highlights of that vision moving forward?
Thank you, Shihoko, for having me on this platform. It's nice to be back at the Wilson Center after many months and to be talking about what I think is seen around the world as quite a seismic change when it comes to the results of the elections in the United States, although I suppose one could have anticipated where the popular opinion was headed, and a victory of President Trump perhaps was foreseen in many quarters. You asked me about the impact of the victory of President Trump, or former President Trump, now to be President Trump, in the elections on the India-US relationship, and whether one would anticipate a golden age in India-US relations to come. I would say that there is already a renaissance in India-US relations, and one has seen this developing perhaps for at least 2 decades now. And today you have a comprehensive global strategic partnership that is very multifaceted, that has many, many sides to it, and has been mutually beneficial to both countries. Certainly, there is very strong chemistry between President Trump and Prime Minister Modi, and one has seen that demonstrated during the first 4 years when Mr. Trump was president, the visits that each made to each other's countries, and the very special bonhomie that was on display on each occasion. So chemistry is certainly the first point that I'd like to stress when it comes to the India-US relationship. It's true that under President Biden, the relationship maintained a steady pace of development, and many more strengthening factors in the strategic relationship were definitely in evidence. And when it came especially to the Indo-Pacific, since we're here to talk about the Indo-Pacific, you saw, of course, the resuscitation of the Quad under President Trump during his first presidency, but under President Biden, these relations were elevated to the summit level, and therefore, one saw a greater level of commitment, I would say on India's behalf at least, to the Quad, although there are opinions expressed perhaps within the United States that we need much more defense and security content to this conglomerate, and that perhaps it has, in a sense, moved into areas that were not perhaps part of its original definition, but which have certainly, I believe, sustained the organization and provided more substance to the cooperation between the 4 countries involved. Now, when it comes to, everybody talks about strong leaders today, and I'm not talking of democracy versus autocracy, but I think there is a penchant in many of our democracies for strong leadership. And I think Prime Minister Modi has himself been re-elected twice, and this is really his 3rd term, as you know. And he has been very much the epitome of strong leadership for India. And his popularity and his appeal to the electorate definitely stems from that impression of strength that he's able to convey, and the ability to carry out a lot of changes within the system and to receive popular support for it. And one is, in a sense, seeing a manifestation of that within the United States also, in terms of what the popular vote has delivered as far as the election is concerned. But I think democracy sustains both our countries, both our republics, as it were, and we have strong institutions. And in that sense, even as people talk of a larger chaos premium within the world just because President Trump is coming back to the White House. I believe that essentially there will be self-correcting mechanisms that enable a degree, at least, a degree of sustaining stability within the world system to continue. When it comes to China, I know the US-China relationship is very much in focus for all of us today. And for us in India, because China is a next door neighbor, even though people, identify it as an East Asian power, it's very much on our borders. We have, as you know, a very long, unsettled border with China. And that border has been unstable in the last few years. We had a military clash, as you know, 4 years ago in Galwan, up in the mountain fastnesses of Ladakh. And at that time, when we did have that clash and when our soldiers died, the United States was very much a source of support to us in terms of intelligence, in terms of winter gear that it was able to provide, in terms of the drones that came to us from the Americans. So there is that factor that has, in a sense, also, I believe, provided strength to our relationship. Now, here in India, and in terms of the multipolarity that we speak about in the world situation today, one doesn't hear too much of that talk from the United States. And the United States obviously sees itself as the sole superpower. And in many ways, it is, in terms of the strength it's able to purvey in the rest of the world. But we've seen in our own region, with the rise of China, the effect and the ripples that it creates both in the Pacific and Indian Ocean are very, very strong and harbingers of great change in our region. And India has had to deal with that, both in terms of strengthening its relationship with the United States, which it would like to continue even under President Trump in his second presidency. And obviously, that will be the direction of our efforts. But at the same time, we have to build balancing relationships with other countries in the region. And our relationship with Russia, for instance, our participation in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the whole rise of the BRICS, for instance, these are all evidence of diversity, growing diversity in global politics. Now, President Trump himself is not a great votary of either multilateralism or globalization, as we know. So we'll have to see how that pans out. And I think the trade factor, trade and technology and investment are very important aspects of the India-US relationship. And when it comes to trade, which Donald Trump calls his favorite word in the English dictionary, besides love and faith, as he says. So when it comes to trade and the tariffs, he threatens to impose on all imports into the United States from the rest of the world, up to 20% for countries other than China and 60% for China. And whether this will be a bargaining chip, which it could well be, or whether it's something that he just comes down on everybody sledgehammer-like, we'll have to see, because there always is that factor of uncertainty in what Mr. Trump says. So in that sense, there are mixed signals, and we'll have to see how this affects the India-US relationship. Trade is very important in this relationship today because the United States is our largest trading partner, but we have a trade imbalance. I mean, India has the advantage, and the US has a trade imbalance with India of about $30 billion. So what Donald Trump's reaction to that would be interesting. He calls India a trade king, even as he calls Narendra Modi his best friend. So he will be, in a sense, dealing with India with both these hands. I mean, playing good cop and bad cop at the same time, I think. But we have this huge Indian diaspora in the United States, as you know. It's approaching 5 million persons. And in terms of their influence and in terms of their standing in US society, I think it's it's growingly prominent. They're very mainstreamed into American life today. And you saw that with Kamala Harris, you see that with Nikki Haley, you see that with the Indian American congressman, and the second lady of the United States is going to be, I mean, Mrs. Vance is Indian. I mean, she's from South India, born of immigrant parents who came from South India. So these factors obviously bind us together very closely. So the United States is very much with us. It's the most important foreign policy relationship for us today. And finally, I'd like to come to the question of human rights and religious freedoms. This was something which democratic presidencies have always sought to give some emphasis to, and there have been irritants in the relationship, that have surfaced from time to time, and they did with the Biden administration today also. You are aware of the controversy over, there is a case, there is an indictment over a role purportedly played by Indian agents in the attempt to assassinate Khalistan leader in the United States, Mr. Pannoon. And so that is an ongoing legal matter, and I don't suppose that can be really suppressed, even under a Trump presidency. We'll have to see how that develops and how that is resolved. But I can say with a certain degree of certitude that Donald Trump is not somebody who's going to be lecturing India on these issues. And he is, of course, against terrorism and against separatism. And, when he talks of make America great again, I think that spirit and that passion with which he speaks about it, I think definitely resonates in India, because that is exactly what we would like to see happening in India also. This, civilizational ethos that we have, that rich history that we have, coming alive once again, and growing, our economy growing at a sustained pace. And that's our route really to global power, we all know. And that is really going to be the focus also for us when it comes to relations with the outside world, promoting our interests, keeping our doors open to most countries, and giving primacy to the United States when it comes to our foreign policy.
Thank you, Ambassador Rao. You covered a lot of ground there, and I do want to come back on your point about managing relations not just with the United States, but also with China, and how that will shape the regional dynamics as well. But before I do that, I would like to remind our viewers that we are taking questions today. Please feel free to leave comments and questions in the chat box below. And so with that, Professor Gill, you've been incredibly patient. I would like to ask you to comment on US-Filipino relations. And as we know, the Philippines had an election 2 years ago, and we saw a leadership change from Rodrigo Duterte to Ferdinand Marcos Jr. And that's led to a considerable shift in Filipino foreign policy. We've seen closer relations between the Philippines and the United States, as well as its allies, most notably Japan. But again, Philippines will be holding what is expected to be a very heated midterm election next year. We know, of course, that we cannot predict election results, but there are already significant differences between the visions of President Marcos and, of course, with his rival, Vice President Sara Duterte, hoping you might be able to highlight some of the priorities that the current Filipino administration has with Trump, and what we'll have with Trump, I should say, and where we can see greater coordination and cooperation between Manila and Washington.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Ms. Shihoko, for this opportunity and the Wilson Center. It's a great honor to be amongst such distinguished experts and practitioners So I appreciate this opportunity to discuss about my country's possible way towards this new dynamic shift in U.S. national politics. Now, the Philippine-U.S. alliance is a definite de facto cornerstone in Philippine foreign policy. And when we talk about how this may impact the bilateral relationship, well, I'd like to start off by saying that I do not think that there would be such a radical shift in the trajectory of bilateral relations, particularly in the realm of defense and maritime security cooperation. You know, the stakes to maintain and strengthen the Philippine-U.S. alliance have become considerably high, you know, for both sides, given the continued expansionist ambitions of China in the West Philippine Sea and the Greater South China Sea, and the fact that the alliance has become so institutionalized in terms of a hub for like-minded cooperation within, you know, the extended U.S. alliance network in the East and in the West. We have the trilateral going on with Japan. We have the Squad with Australia. And the Philippine-U.S. alliance has also become a fulcrum for cooperation with Canada and many countries in Europe. And on top of that, we also see that in Trump's America First idea, maintaining U.S. preeminence, particularly in the Indo-Pacific, will be crucial. And I think that it is an undeniable fact that China possesses not only the material capabilities, but also the intent to challenge U.S. interests in the region. And we're not talking merely about preserving the rules-based order. You know, the whole value-driven approach may not really find itself to be a top priority. You know, we'd like to assume under President-elect Trump's foreign policy in the Indo-Pacific. But when it comes to maintaining U.S. influence and preeminence, I think that it all boils down to how well Washington will be able to address China's belligerence and expansionism in the region. So the alliance serves as an undeniable element in achieving this goal. Now, because of Mr. Trump's transactionalism, leader to leader negotiations matter a lot. Personalities, as you've mentioned, Ms. Shihoko, matters a lot. And I think that there's a lot to learn from former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, as Professor Mori has rightfully mentioned, how the rapport between both leaders has managed to allow Japan to maximize its relations with the US and vice versa in the Indo-Pacific, right? So in addition to that, during Trump 1.0, we have to remember uh, the Philippines was under former President Rodrigo Duterte, who was not really interested in engaging effectively and substantially, not just with the U.S. but with the rest of the Western world. In fact, throughout his 6-year term, which is quite unprecedented for any Philippine president, there was no special visit, there was no state visit to any Western country. So in that dynamic, you know, this was despite the fact that it was in fact the Trump administration that was engaging quite well with the Philippines. You have to note that it was under the Trump administration when the geographic scope of the Mutual Defense Treaty between Manila and Washington was clarified, you know, in over a decade, you know, to encompass the Greater South China Sea. And the whole idea of pushing the ironclad relationship, the alliance further, occurred as well during the Trump administration. But unfortunately, Manila at that time did not really see the need to maximize that relationship with Washington due to the personal biases of former President Duterte, who was misguided in his appeasement strategy towards Beijing with the hopes, with the misplaced hope, of course, of gaining economically by downplaying the Philippines' rights, sovereign rights over the West Philippine Sea in accordance to UNCLOS and the 2016 arbitral ruling. However, towards the end of the Duterte administration, recognizing that public sentiments have been quite negative, particularly towards Duterte's handling of the West Philippine Sea. You know, there was a poll conducted in 2019, a nationwide poll, stating that, you know, there's a huge percentage, you know, over 80%, or it was 79%, if I'm not mistaken, that wanted Manila to become more assertive towards China in the West Philippine Sea, for the Philippines not to trust China. And particularly in 2019, this occurred when a Chinese ship rammed into a small Filipino fishing boat, leaving the crew to drown. It was actually the Vietnamese Coast Guard that came in to rescue Filipino sailors. But even then, the former president downplayed the issue to the disappointment of the Filipino people. And if we note, during the transition period from Duterte to Marcos Jr., 89% of Filipinos, based on another nationwide poll, stated that they want the next president to safeguard the West Philippine Sea more effectively, right? So today, under the Marcos Jr. administration, I believe that the Philippines possesses greater capacity to negotiate more effectively with the Trump administration. In fact, there was already a reciprocal interaction between President Marcos Jr. and President-elect Trump, with President Marcos Jr. sending a personal text. And it was reported that President-elect Trump also acknowledged and perhaps responded to it as well. So there was this initial willingness in Manila to engage with the new government in Washington, right? So there are, of course, a lot of opportunities within this partnership. However, there are also challenges that the Philippines will need to address, particularly under a Trump administration. So first, Manila has endeavored to maintain agency, in serving as an active stakeholder in ensuring the rules-based order is intact in the Indo-Pacific maritime domain. However, given the transactionalist approach of Mr. Trump, the Philippines must endeavor to position itself favorably within Trump's transactional perspective of international politics. There needs to be more effort and consistency in negotiating on critical issues that matter to the Philippines, to the US, and both of the allies, how they face it in the region. Given that there are certain concerns of the US perhaps sidelining particular or specific areas that were traditionally important for the sake of economic benefits. Of course, there are speculations regarding the ability to strike an economic deal that would lessen the trade deficit with China. What could that involve in terms of U.S. decision making? So I feel that it is necessary for the Philippines to maintain its position and to enhance its position in the eyes of the Trump administration. That's very important. The second challenge here is economics. Now, the Philippines is a net importing country. We rely on imports significantly, and now we are seeking to expand our horizons in facilitating more investments in the country, foreign direct investments. Now, the problem here is that under the Biden administration, the idea of friendshoring gained some salience, at least the idea of it, and that is to mix. Well, obviously, businesses, private companies are driven by profit interests, right? Not necessarily geopolitics, but to have the White House, for instance, try to coordinate with such companies to pursue this whole idea of friendshoring was an opportunity for the Philippines. However, even then, we were not still able to effectively leverage this capacity, given that our domestic economic environment still needs a lot of work. And it was, in fact, our neighbors such as Vietnam, Indonesia, Cambodia, or rather Malaysia, that have significantly gained from this idea of relocating US investments, right? But under the Trump administration, there would be a deeper emphasis on profit driven commercial ties. And I think that this is a challenge, but at the same time, an opportunity for the Philippines to enhance the facilitation of its domestic economic environment, right? So I believe that the idea of friendshoring will be thrown out of the window. And this is something that the Philippines will need to grasp and enhance in the long term. And of course, the last point I'd like to make is that the Philippines must continue its multi-aligned approach, along with, of course, putting the Philippine-U.S. alliance front and center as the Marcos Jr. administration has had the opportunity to diversify and expand its defense and economic networks. I mean, South Korea, for instance, we have just recently held a conference, track 1.5 actually, coordinated by the Korea Foundation, the Strat-Based Institute, in the Philippines to explore more cooperation between the Philippines and South Korea on defense and economics. And similarly, Japan, as I've argued on many occasions, could actually be seen as a partner of almost equal credibility for Manila, such as Washington. And of course, we've seen broad ranges of partnerships with India, with France, and all these countries, with Canada as well. So I believe that the Philippines must continue to emphasize on these partnerships, along with treading the line, emphasizing the need for cooperation with the United States. So I think that along with the challenges, there are opportunities. And again, I believe in this case, personalities matter a lot. And from Duterte, we can see more potential under Marcos Jr. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Professor Gill, for that. It leads to a good segue into a question that we have from Kawala Xie of South China Morning Post, who asks, will Trump prioritize alliances in the Indo-Pacific to counter China as President Biden did? And let me kind of elaborate on that and say that the United States is a highly polarized nation, but at the same time, there is great expectation that US policy towards China writ large will likely remain unchanged. We've seen a continuum and a kind of growing commitment from Trump to Biden on China policy that is expected to continue in the second Trump administration. But at the same time, we need to recognize that the China challenge is perceived very differently across the Indo-Pacific. And we've already heard from Ambassador Rao, as well as from Professor Gill about some of the China challenges as well as opportunities that it provides. I'd like to turn first to Ambassador On and then to Professor Mori to touch upon how Korea Korea for Ambassador On, Japan for Professor Mori, on how they see their respective countries working together or diverging when it comes to managing relations with China.
Well, one of the things which President Yoon did soon after his inauguration, he was inaugurated in May 2022, and then in December he declared Korea's Indo-Pacific strategy. And in the Indo-Pacific strategy, I think he took note of the necessity why Korea should be working to maintain and promote rule-based international order. But with respect to China, then what President Yoon said through the statement was, well, Korea definitely wishes to further promote relations with China, but on the basis of rule-based international order, mutual respect, and mutual benefit. And then on that basis, then of course, Korea has made steady efforts in order to promote relations with China. And one indicator, much observed indicator in Korea about the relationship between Korea and China would be the exchange of visits at the high level. And then of course there have been meeting between President Yoon and then President Xi, as well as meeting between say higher level of officials. But at the same time, when it comes to how frequent and how effective those meetings have been, there was always certain expectation back in Seoul that we in fact should be seeing more, so that those visits, those contacts would be leading to, in fact, more tangible development in the relationship between Korea and China. And Shihoko, you'd remember there was this incident of THAAD, deployment of THAAD back in 2017. And then after that, there was all different kinds of, sanctions, quote unquote sanctions, China imposed on economic relations, cultural relations, and other relations between Korea and China. And in fact, little by little, those sanctions have been moved, those embargoes have been moved. And most recently, there was a certain measure which was taken by China, which was China, in fact, lifted the necessity of getting entrance visa to China for visit of less than 15 days. And then as we understand it, it in fact came as a kind of surprise to Korea. So where there are indications that what Korea intends to do in promoting relationship with China, in fact, that is making steady progress. Thank you.
I think generally speaking, in the area of defense and diplomacy related to China, our cooperation with the United States will continue or even accelerate. For example, when we look at the area of defense, Japan and the United States have been cooperating to enhance our deterrence capacity. And here, in the latest 2+2 meeting, Defense and Foreign Ministers meeting took place at the end of July. And there were several major initiatives that have been rolled out. Command and control, extended deterrence dialogue at the ministerial level, joint capability development, force posture initiatives. All these initiatives I think are likely to continue into the Trump administration, and even in certain areas, it could become even more robust. In fact, those are some expectations that I have with respect to the area of defense. With regard to diplomacy, echoing Ambassador Ang, I think Japan would also be engaging China diplomatically, and I think the Trump administration will also be holding talks with the Chinese government. Not that we expect any fundamental breakthroughs on very tough issues like Senkaku Islands and South China Sea and Taiwan, but I think there's general shared understanding that it's necessary to continue these diplomatic engagements in order to avoid misperceptions and misunderstandings. So generally speaking, I think there will be a sort of an effort to maintain a diplomatic dialogue with China. One area that Japan will probably not follow is tariffs. Japan will unlikely impose high tariffs like the Trump administration vis-a-vis China. Because it would just hurt the Japanese companies too much. So I think we will try to find a way to sort of speak with the Trump administration about the necessity of addressing some of the unfair trade practices that China's undertaking. But we'll probably try to address it through some other means, work through WTO or any sort of other channels to sort of address that issue.
Thank you. We have a lot of questions, but time is running short. So I'd like to do our final wrap-up question, which is very easy. It's this. If you were to have time with Trump, President-elect Trump, for 2 minutes, what would you advise him vis-a-vis your respective governments? Let me start with you, Ambassador Rao. 2 minutes with President-elect Trump. What should he focus on US-India relations?
Well, I'd like to request him to focus on the centrality of India-US relations for peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific. And secondly, I would perhaps convey to him that there are a lot of expectations in India about his ability to deliver beyond transactionalism, because he's made very lofty promises during his election campaign, and to see how that impacts this relationship, which is of importance to both our democracies. So I would say to him, less transactionalism, focus on the strategic importance of this relationship. Let's work together for the future, for the benefit of both our democracies and our people, because people are at the heart of this relationship.
Thank you. And I believe that actually resonates with all countries that the United States engages with. But let me turn over to you, Professor Gill.
Thank you very much. Now, in just 2 minutes, I think that's quite interesting. So I think that the most important thing that needs to be put on the table is that there is a need to further institutionalize whatever is currently unfolding and taking place within the Philippine-US alliance network. Now, it's no secret that the Philippine foreign policy trajectory has been far from consistent since 1946. And it is necessary to maintain institutionalized cooperation, particularly in the maritime space, to ensure that the region is conducive for both the US and the Philippines to pursue their interests. And of course, an expansionist China always is on the lookout for areas for exploitation. Any inconsistencies in cooperation has often been exploited, as we have seen throughout the past administration. So the need to institutionalize what we have, along with our like-minded partners, would be crucial to ensure that like-minded partners and their interests prevail towards the stability of the region.
Great, thank you. Professor Mori, US-Japan relations.
Yes, I would probably send him two messages. Number one, Japan's cumulative investment in the United States has been number one for 5 consecutive years. So why don't you give Japan tariff exemption? That would be my first message. And my second message is that in the area of defense, strengthening Japan-US alliance would generate huge leverage over Japan and North Korea. And therefore, Japan's a strategic asset for the United States, and it's better for you to advance defense cooperation with Japan. Those are the two messages that I would probably pitch to Mr. Trump. Yeah.
Great. Ambassador An, I have to be honest, many of the questions were actually addressed to you regarding North Korea. And one question as well was about the possibility of South Korea becoming a nuclear power as well. But so we'll have to have a separate conversation with you on another occasion. But 2 minutes with President-elect Trump, what would you say?
Right. Well, first and foremost, President Trump is a businessman. And I think there is something all good businessmen understand, which is that if there is an asset you have, you must make best use of your assets. And then what is the asset United States as a global leader? That, in fact, is the allies. Large number of allies, very capable, and large number of allies who wish to work with the United States. And there is a great asset that United States has. And United States must, in fact, think about how to make best use of its allies, including all of the countries represented in this panel: Korea, Japan, India, and then the Philippines. And President Trump, as a good businessman, must understand how to make best use of his best asset. I mean, the best asset United States has, which is allies. And well, if we start from that basis, then I think we'll be able to find answer to a large number of questions we have been discussing so far. That is to say, well, how to deal with all those challenges we face around the world, how to deal with, say, this issue, these economic issues of inflation, growth, job creation, etc., etc. So if we start on the basis of, say, strengthening alliance, then I think that, in fact, must be the starting point for U.S. foreign policy in the days to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts with us. We look forward to a Trump administration that will continue to be engaged in the Indo-Pacific. And speaking about the Indo-Pacific, the Wilson Center's Indo-Pacific program will be releasing a policy prescription report to be submitted to the White House and to Congress, provisionally entitled A New U.S. Vision for the Indo-Pacific. I hope you'll be able to read that once it's out at the end of the year. I get all the glory by being able to be here on camera, but all of these efforts cannot be possible without a strong team at the Wilson Center. I want to thank my colleagues, Michael Kugelman, Troy Stangerone, Kayla Orta, Lucas Myers, Mary Ratliff, and of course, we could not do this without our amazing IT AV team as well. In particular, I want to say thank you to Keen McBride. And thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm so sorry we weren't able to get to all the questions, but I do hope you will continue to watch and read and engage with the Wilson Center. But for now, thank you and goodbye. Hope to see you again soon.